And we're on. Welcome back to Movie Whale Movie Marathon Series. We're still in Planet of the Apes. We're on the fourth one, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. I'm Andrew.
I'm Mack.
Yes. And we will begin with you. I've got less energy now. We do these back to back. So, quick little summary. Again, this movie takes place 20 years after the events of the third one. The chimpanzee baby swap that occurred at the end. Cornelius and Zira's baby has grown up, raised by the circus master Armando. Great. We'll talk about that in a minute. We are now in a strangely sped up fascist dystopian kind of world.
Yes. I have questions about that.
We'll get there. Where the slave apes have already begun, and Milo has been renamed to Caesar. And his, quite literally, his existence and presence is all that is needed to kick off the beginning of the Planet of the Apes. And, of course, there are some human villains that are trying to chase him down and go after him and stop that from happening. That's essentially a reduced summary of this movie.
For sure. There's a lot going on.
Yes, there was, but also...
that is basically everything that happens is Caesar exists and doesn't like the way that apes are treated as slaves, and then there's a rebellion. Like
that's kind of it. How do you feel? What Max thoughts?
I like the parts of this. I am not entirely sure if it works as a whole. There are some things that happen simply because they have to happen. And that is a little lazy in terms of writing. But there's so much allegory happening here that I'm kind of allowing it because I want to see what they have to say. So I'm not upset, I guess, by the things that don't totally make sense.
Yeah.
I just don't want to praise the movie for it because there are some things that it could have done a little better.
I'm in a very similar spot. There are certain things I think this movie does very well, but then there's other things where it's like, I see where you were going with this, and as a teacher, you're the teacher. As I'm the teacher, I see your rough draft, finish it. I know you can do better. Like, that's what I'm thinking. Like, with the last one, I can think of things I would have done differently. Entirely. This one, I'm like, no, you've done it. Just do more of the things you've done and move some things around. Like, because my favorite parts of this movie are the things that are completely glossed over. And it's so frustrating because the idea of Armando raising Caesar.
Oh, I know.
Amazing. We get none of that.
We should have some of that.
I almost wish he wasn't in the movie at all because they introduce him. He brings Caesar to the city just to show him what life is like. I find that to be a believable kickoff of the events.
It's believable. It's a little foolhardy, but it's believable.
Yeah, but then when an ape is being beaten by some cops, they're they're not cops, but the allegory is that they are cops.
Right. They're kind of cops.
They are kind of cops. They're technically under ape management, but they're cops. Right. And then Caesar yells, "Human bastards," or something like that. And everyone stops, and they're like, "Hey, did that ape talk?" And Armando's like, "No, that was me." I don't know why everyone immediately it's like, I don't know. I think that ape talked. Like, really?
Agreed.
20 years later, and the case technically was closed, and you think that was the I just don't think that's believable because that's the whole catalyst for the conflict. Yeah, I just don't find it as believable. And then when Armando goes back and he's trying to explain and prove his innocence, and they interrogate him for like 2 or 3 days. They do that, and again, the metaphor and the comparison is great. I watched in school a lot of movies about how certain aspects of the German government would do that, like pre-wall coming down, and it was very similar to that. But they would do that to people regardless of if they're, guilty or innocent or whatever. But they'd also have ways to know when people were guilty. And it's just, in this instance, they have nothing. Nothing.
Right.
Like, they don't have, like, it's not like we know as the audience, like, oh no, I hope they don't get them. But, like, they don't even have anything compelling. So it's just very frustrating and stupid, and it just feels like fascism, which, like, I feel like, again, it's supposed to, but I think you could have made it feel a little more weighted if they had real evidence. Because the only piece of evidence they use, and I'm sorry, I know you have your note. Hold on, 1 second. This is my last thing. Just hold on. They compare a picture of Cornelius to a drawing of Caesar, and they're like, it's spitting image, isn't it? It's like, bitch, you can draw anything you want. He could have done that because people recognized Cornelius. That's not proof. I really thought when Caesar goes through all of the checks and stuff, when he gets put into the ape facility, and they scan his palms and they take his picture, I'm like, shit. They got stuff now.
It's done.
They got evidence. He's in the system.
Well, they're asking for extra copies of chimp prints too.
Exactly.
For a chimp,
I was like, okay,
right?
they got him now. They got him. But like, no, that's none of it. They compare a drawing to a picture, and that's the big, oh my god, we got him moment. It's like, no, you really don't. You don't. Sorry, but anyway.
Yeah.
Your thoughts.
So, quick note on the Armando stuff. I just kind of chalk it up to Armando being like a super sweet character, and he just wouldn't stand up under interrogation regardless. But you're right, they have no reason to hold him, which is largely because they're trying really hard. The movie is trying really hard to establish this fascist state, which is weird because it's only 20 years after the original one.
Yeah, no, it's 1991.
The earlier one. And yeah, 1991. And when they bring us into the film, they don't even say United States. They say North America 1991. So are we suggesting that there's been some sort of governmental collapse? And they don't explain that, like, at all.
No, they don't.
The only power that we interact with, the only head of state, is like the governor, and that's not even
right. Like, why do we give a shit about what the governor has to say? But we do in this. He's the end all be all.
And I'm kind of wondering if, like, maybe somehow Zira and Cornelius accelerated things just simply by being back in the past in the last one. Those butterfly effect stuff.
Yeah.
That doesn't really makes sense.
I don't
because like the fact that the cats and dogs die like super early, like it's only 10 years after Zira and Cornelius, the cats and dogs die, and they only have 10 years to set up this slavery system with the apes.
I know, yeah.
It seems super established, and the apes seem to be really intelligent. Like, according to the last film, it took them 200 years to develop those skills as slaves.
Right, exactly. It
200
moves
years, 10 years,
really
it's
quickly.
Not the same.
Yeah, so the disease that takes out the dogs and cats comes from space. Part of me likes to think that disease is something that became just like a normal thing that the apes have, and the disease is from them. So like, it's not like a disease from space. I don't know this for sure. This is headcanon. So they brought it back and introduced it early, but that does not change how long it would take for the apes to develop intelligence. Also, it would not change how quick, human perception to be so much more aggressive may have changed because of what happened. But at the same time, as we talked about so much in the last movie, it was only really one guy that was being an asshole about the presence of intelligent apes. We didn't see any prejudice, which is also, we didn't talk about that enough. That's kind of weird that we didn't see any prejudice from any of the other humans. Like, Zero got immediately brought into a women's club. Like, that's the other movie. Anyway. This movie, everything is sped up. We're in our it's hard to say dystopia because it's technically not. It's only dystopia from the one perspective. But at the same time, it is. It's a fascist dystopia.
It is. It's clearly supposed to be like a slavery allegory, very clearly.
Well, yes, of course.
And I think that's interesting. So I'm almost willing to pardon the movie, but really I think my problem is I was like, you could have just made it further along in the timeline. Like, there's no reason for it to be modern day.
No. You could have
We
had
could
a
do
descendant
Bill.
of Cornelius and still had the same actor. I do love that McDowell, I think his name is back. He's great. He does really well with acting more juvenile in this. Because you meet Cornelius in the first movie and you're like, aha, yeah, he's 40. And this guy, though, he feels like a young guy who is new to all
He feels
this.
like a young, rebellious leader.
Yeah, he's a great character. That's the other part, the rebellious leader. My favorite part of this movie probably is Caesar using the existing system to develop resources by writing in extra things on shopping notes, by having cooks collect knives, to have people like it's brilliant. That should be 80% of this movie. The first part of the movie should go a little faster. He gets swept up into the system, and then he spends the rest of the movie systematically using the system to create the rebellion. This brilliant scene and this great idea is all of combined 45 seconds. It's infuriating. I hate it.
It's worth noting, like, before we get too far, Cornelius's attempts to act
Caesar.
less intelligent than he is really funny. Yes, thank you. Caesar's intelligent. Caesar's attempts to act less intelligent than he actually is they're funny. It's really funny. Because, like, some of them, like, are somewhat believable. He kind of pulls it off. And then he does things like he picks up handcuffs unprompted for somebody.
I was going to say,
like, buddy.
I actually found that kind of frustrating and inconsistent because it seems like later on he knows to act not super intelligent. But then when he first arrives, and it's not like something you learn. You've grown up in this world. You already know this. But he gets there and he's immediately doing tasks the right way. He's helping other apes. I'm like, dude, reel it in. Trip. Drool a little. Something. Like, you are not being subtle about how smart you are. And that's like a big no-no.
If we had more time with Armando and Caesar in the beginning, and they established some sort of character trait where, like, the dude just can't help himself. He's gotta share what he has with people. He's gotta help people. He's just so instinctively kind that, you know, it doesn't matter if his life's a danger because of it. And there are that are like that. Consider Aang from Avatar.
Yes.
Like, there's not enough time to establish character before his life is in danger. So a lot of his actions feel less intelligent and seem to kind of like take a hit maybe a little on him. I just laugh a little bit because I'm sitting here and I'm like, you're smart, but you're having a hard time with the sneaking. Like, you're not doing a super great job with the deception.
I know.
I mean, he opens the book and he points. I was
gonna say the same thing.
Eye contact.
I was gonna say the same thing. Like, dude, you cannot try to tell me that you are not a smart. Like, if we had robots and we've designed them to be smart, and I'm like, Mr. Robot, I'm not a huge asshole. I would like you to pick your name, and that will be your designation. And a robot walks over to a book, systematically, specifically picks a name, and then looks right at me. I'd be like, hi, I think maybe I don't need a robot anymore. You know, I think I'm good. Like,
which is what he does. He's like, we're not gonna make a bartender out of this guy.
I know these aren't those kinds of movies. But, like, again, we didn't talk about this in the last movie. When Zira puts all the colored blocks away and then puts her fingers together and rests her head on her hands, like, that's more terrifying and impressive than the puzzle she just solved. Apes don't do that, dude. Like, no one's talking about body language. Anyway, yes. He is specifically trying to blend in while also not. And it's just weirdly inconsistent and a little frustrating. There's also, I think the humans are weirdly back and forth with how smart they are. Because the shipment that he sneaks into is the shipment of orangutans. And I'm a little animal nerd. I knew that was gonna, even when I was a kid, I knew that was gonna be important somehow. But it's how it's important that I don't think is as big a oh shit as it maybe should have been. Because when they get that error, and the guy says, well, there's a chimpanzee in the shipment from Borneo of orangutans. I'm like, well, what's the problem? It's like, well, chimpanzees don't live in Borneo. It's like, oh, you're right. But wouldn't you have had a manifest that said 3 orangutans, no chimpanzee? And wouldn't that have more of an impact? Because I'll bet my ass you can find a chimpanzee in Borneo because zoos exist. But you're looking for a chimp, and here's this random chimp. Like, I feel like that moment is like 90% perfect. The humans are being smart, but they're being the wrong kind of smart. Like, it's a ship. Of course, there's a manifest.
I'm willing to pass actually a little bit on the initial like guy who was with the clipboard, like checking things off.
Well, him,
like,
yeah.
Yeah, because he's just a grunt and he sees so
Right.
many of these shipments a day.
Exactly.
He's like, it's fine. There's probably a billion mistakes in the manifest.
And
you know?
he snuck into it when it arrived. So like it's already they've already checked it. That's so good. It's the secondary villain whose big line is, well, chimps don't live in Borneo. It's like no. Look at the paperwork.
It's not a smoking gun.
No,
like,
paperwork, sir. Paperwork. That would have been better. Anyway. Also, I do have a little bit of trivia about this one, which I won't do every time, but I don't have a whole lot to say about this movie otherwise. We'll talk about the ending in a second, but when we go to the bookstore or the library, that female orangutan is the only female ape we see in all of these movies except for chimpanzees. We never see a female gorilla or another female orangutan except for her. And her name is Zelda, so she deserves respect. So that's fun. Also, I found, what's her name? Lisa, to be a little all over the place. Lisa looks like she's owned by that mean blonde lady. Then she's also working in records. Then she's also a part of the breeding program. Like, she's everywhere.
I think it makes sense for her to be in the breeding program and also in one of those other locations, but it doesn't make sense for her to be in all 3, especially the other 2, because she's either a personal helper to that one lady, Ripley or something.
Yeah, or she's a government agent.
Or she's working for the government, right? So there's not really... Also, I feel like there's a clear parallel to Nova simply because of the situations and the way that the movies are set up.
Yes.
And I understand why this is the way that it is, but the fact that Caesar's just like, I guess I'm just gonna go mate with Lisa, and if that happened with Nova and Taylor, we would have like serious issues, even though it's
that is what happened in the first one. It's just not as explicit.
Well, I wasn't sure, but yeah, potentially. Yeah. Well, and like it's like there was at least a little bit more. There was more weight to it in the movie than there was in this one.
I think the only thing that makes this one better is that it's early on established that there's mutual interest. Whereas
all right.
that's the other thing though I think that hurts this movie is that it's very clear that the apes are already fairly self-aware and intelligent, whereas the humans in the first Planet of the Apes are more animalistic than the apes in this movie.
Yes. Yeah, good point.
And
that's problematic to me because the timelines and everything.
I don't like it at all. And the fact that the revolution is started just by Caesar nodding at apes.
I know. People like just start looking at him. Like the apes just like watch him as he walks by. He's not even really doing anything.
Yeah.
And
like he looks at the one gorilla and he's just like, that's it. And he just starts dumping the trash and jumping up and down on it. Like, you're not even communicating with them. Like, what is this? What is this? What has happened? What is going on? Like, it's just a lot. And it's not a lot in the right way. Like, he doesn't learn to manipulate them. He doesn't learn to communicate with them. And I'm holding back a lot.
He decides he's done and he's the intelligent one, so they start rebelling.
Yeah, and I'm holding back a lot because we'll talk about it a lot more in 2 weeks, because Rise of the Planet of the Apes is essentially this movie when they like reboot it, and it's so good. And it's like it's clearly like they have a foundation to work off of, and it's not so similar to this that like knowing that really spoils anything. I don't think, because it's a completely different situation, different world, different everything. But it's like,
I mean, I knew that his name was also Caesar,
right?
So I figured there was some
Yeah,
connection.
there are, but like it's the time it takes, the establishing of relationships, the growth, the acquiring
the
of
only
intelligence.
Relationship really established in this one is between Caesar and McDonald. Yeah.
Yeah, and also not really. That was also a moment I thought was really stupid because he saves Caesar, and then I'm like, it's because he knew, because this guy, he's with it. He was paying attention. He understood. And then Caesar talks and is like, he's surprised. Oh, so then you didn't fucking know. What were you doing? Why did you feel attached to this ape?
I think he just felt sympathy for him, and maybe in the same way that like Zira knew that Taylor was more intelligent. She just couldn't, like, she didn't expect him to full on speak. Like, same maybe with this situation. It's not great, you know.
I don't know. I look. I know they're ridiculously different movies, okay, but I found similarities in the way that McDonald. You said Donald?
Yeah, I think so.
McDonald. The way he looks at Caesar, it gave me the same vibe as when Robbie looks at Peter Parker in the Daily Bugle and he's like, "I heard Spider-Man was there." It's like, oh, okay, so he kind of knows and has for a while maybe, but he's like being cool about it. But that's not not what this ends up being.
When Caesar messes up making the drink in the governor's office, McDonald says, brightness has never been encouraged in slaves, which is sort of like hint. He might have done that maybe intentionally, because if he's smart, then he's going to get himself in trouble. Like, that's one way that one could be interpreted.
That's what I thought they were doing.
And in the end, like, I don't know. I think there's still room for him to be like, this ape is clearly intelligent, and I kind of want to protect that. At the same time of him not expecting him to be fully like sentient speaking.
I think it would be stronger if he knew. I think it would be a bigger impact if he knew the whole time, because then it's less a dude who, by all intents and purposes in his era, is just saving a really smart animal versus a guy who actually cares about the sentience of these creatures and knows this guy has a role in it. Like,
they just gotta play him for sympathy through most of the film, in the sense that he seems to understand them.
Yeah,
and, he's a black guy, so the again, the allegory is clear, the relationship is clear,
and it's done on purpose, and I do get that, but it makes the difference between him being in his world for the time period as well. The difference between being a hippie and a dude on the inside, and he's so smart and so with it and cares so much. He seems the whole time like a dude on the inside. But then it's clear that he wasn't. And it's just kind of... I think it takes away. I don't think it would have hurt anything if he just kept up with it the whole time. Because if he knew, what's he going to do about it? He can't do anything about it. Yeah, Caesar's here under everyone's nose. I'm just going to do my best to make sure they don't kill him. It's fine. No one else knows. And then someone seems like they know. It's like, okay, so now I have to decide. Am I going to help this guy or not? And he decides to help. And then it turns out, no. He's just helping a really smart ape that can't talk, that isn't sentient, that isn't from the future, that isn't anything. It's just another ape. You don't think your boss is ever going to have another really smart ape that works in the office? Are you going to go free every single one of them? Yes, maybe, probably not. It feels a little back and forth. It's like, okay, we're in this part of mindset. Well, actually, no, we're not. And it's just, I didn't like it. I
understand that the lack of strategy, maybe the lack of maybe full intent is kind of bothersome, because it makes the things a little muddier, makes motivations a little muddier. I'm actually okay with it, because I think it establishes him as a very sympathetic character, in the sense that this character cares a lot in general. He's intelligent. He's the governor's number one man. He shows, and yet he's got all these qualities. He's high up in the power structure, and yet he chooses to be kinder. He chooses to have curiosity. He chooses to try and understand the perspective of the apes, even though he's clearly not trying to change much about their situation. He wishes for a more peaceful interaction between the two species, but he's not trying to like free the slaves. And so he's just kind of someone who has a sympathy for the apes. And that is enough of a reason for him to notice that Caesar is different and to be interested in that. And then once everything starts coming down on Caesar's head, to maybe put a little bit of his protection in place for him. Because he was gonna turn him in. He like the line he says that makes Caesar speak is, "I wish you could understand why I'm doing this or what's gonna happen to you." Like, because he's expressing that he doesn't expect intelligence of a sentient level from him in that line. And then Caesar goes, "Actually, I do." And he goes, "Oh, this changes everything." So I kind of like that part of the character. I understand that it makes things less clear cut. It has less drive for the movie, and a movie that kind of needs a little bit of drive.
Yeah, that too. I think that's where I'm coming from a lot with it. I like those movies where, like, if Caesar's holding back the whole time, and he's like, "Hey, look, I know, okay, and I know, I know. I think you've known, I've known for a while. So go to this place, do that. Here's this key to this thing."
Know. I don't know, but we know.
Yeah, I think that does more for the character when there's like a subtle reveal like that sometimes, or just an illustration of their care and intelligence, and not just a. I understand where you're coming from. I get the allegory, I get the metaphor, I do, but I'm still caught up in he's doing this thing, and he's very much against slavery, and I get that, and I understand that, but it's still in a time period where these are just animals. I love animals. I would hate this too, but that comparison is not quite the same thing. Like, I understand it is, especially for the audience, because we've spent 3 movies watching the apes be sentient, and we've also grown up with Captain Picard and his fantastic lectures on the topic. But, like, was anyone ever talking about this with horses or elephants?
Right.
Or pigs or cows? Like, I get the vegans
it's essentially
are out there
just
doing
a really
it,
complex
like,
pack animal.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's more intelligent, and of course it's more intelligent. Yes, but in this world, it's not. I don't know to what extent apes have any like rights in this time period, and we know how intelligent they are, but they're not that intelligent. And it's just so his character just seems less believable, knowing the limit of what he can know in his time period is all. It's where I'm stuck. I'm stuck on that.
Well, and I think that's interesting too, because in the last few exchanges between the governor and Caesar, there seems to be an understanding from the governor's side of things that there is something about the ape that is human-like, and there's something about the human that is ape-like, talking in general sort of metaphor, general allegory sort of things. And his line about how, like, what does he say exactly? He basically says, "We hate you because we hate
part of
the
ourselves.
darkness in ourselves."
I think that's dumb.
And so he sees a reflection of himself in the ape. And that's kind of where it, like, the idea that they don't see the intelligence of the apes as, like, related to sentience, that's where it starts to break down. And that's actually, I think, a part of the allegory. Because, when African slaves in the United States were a thing, the idea was that they were less than human. They weren't fully human. They didn't have the intelligence. They didn't have the joy of life that, white people did. And therefore, they were actually happier.
We're saying that's the belief, right? Not that
that's the belief.
Okay,
that's not the actual thing.
I
But,
just want to clarify
you have to
that.
talk it out to explain how this actually works really well in the film.
Right.
Obviously, in a practical sense, I don't think this applies to apes, at least not in our world. But but like it's still like they're asking the question. That's what sci-fi does, is it asks the question, what is it to be human? So that's this particular vehicle for this question in this film, and they're kind of using our historical slavery as a way to highlight it, and it works, I think, really well for the film, with the exception that the apes have just not had enough time based off what the world has previously established for them.
Yeah, and also what they've set up is not only are they like really, really intelligent, they're also dumb enough that they've done nothing until a smarter ape nods at them. Right. That's what it takes for them to finally rebel. That's lame. Like, that's not believable. It just isn't.
Yeah.
And I think they could have done better with that. I find the governor's whole thing to be very strange. He talks about all of it. Like, he's very much aware of what he's doing. He's very much aware that revolution, pushback, fighting is always on the brink. It's just going to take someone intelligent enough to lead them. I'm like, dude, if you know that, maybe loosen up. Because, like, none of this is necessary. Right. None of this.
Yeah, like, I mean, the fact that they have like a whole like bunker for control just for apes is
right
a lot. Like the society is terrified of the thing that they've created.
Yep. That's and again, this is something that is explored a little bit in the later movies, which we'll get to. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but there is the dynamic between people and the now developed and intelligent apes. And it's not this, where you've specifically brought them into your land. They weren't here, dude. There was no threat. You brought them here, you trained them, you did this, and you know how dangerous it is, and so you push back on something that's not even pushing back on you yet, but you're waiting for the pushback, and then you're surprised when it happens? Pick a lane! It's a little much.
Oh my gosh, it's not perfect, but that is the same thing that you'll see in academic breakdowns of slavery and racism.
Well, like I do get that. I do get that.
Yeah.
I understand. It's just in a film, it feels like what are you trying to illustrate with the villain? Because it goes back and forth. You either have the ones that are so ignorant and caught up in their beliefs that they do think everything is beneath them, and so they are surprised, and you have the ones that know it's a ticking time bomb, and so that they're either ready, or they've embraced it, or they're waiting for it, kind of systematically. This dude is a weird combination of both, and it just seems a little bit like we didn't know which one we wanted him to be. And I feel like you could have done one or the other, and it would have worked either way, but you didn't really dedicate yourself to one. If that
I
makes
think
sense.
he's just the kind of character that is smart enough to know that there is an injustice happening, and because there's injustice happening, there's danger. But he's not emotionally intelligent, or maybe like he doesn't have a therapist. So he doesn't know that he should change his approach. He, in fact, just wants to lock everything down so nothing changes and he gets to keep things the way they are. They really ought to have explored it. They mention it a couple times. It's in like the setting for the film more than it's in the plot of the film. But the money element here really should have been explored quite a bit more, because that would have explained a lot of motivations from the villain's angle, I think. He clearly is in charge of or operates the business. He has the bunker for ape control. He has the auction yard in his front yard. Right. Like he seems to be managing all of this somewhat directly. So if there is wealth in it, which seems to be suggested that there is, his idea that he has to keep things locked down under control in the way that he wants makes a lot more sense. He just basically just becomes like the capitalist villain, like the one that's going to make money at anybody's cost.
That's true. But I think, again, it's a little bit of, like, there's a lot of different villain archetypes here, and I don't think they mesh very well. Sometimes he feels like the capitalist villain, sometimes he feels like, something right out of Django Unchained, and it seems kind of like we're flipping
those are
through.
the same thing, right?
Well, yeah, but I think the one in Django does better. But like you've got
Okay.
the what's his name? Leonardo DiCaprio's character. Yeah, he's both. But like the first guys that they go hunt down when they're bounty hunters together, they're just racists. They're just
Okay.
racists that like I feel like we're flipping through pages, but like pages of different books. It's just I don't
Mhm.
think it meshes as well. It just kind of feels like we wanted to make him a dastardly, horrible villain that works with the metaphor, but works with multiple metaphors. I just don't think is as strong as it could be. I think one that kind of
Sure.
does very often is like President Snow. He does really well
Mhm.
with multiple kinds of villains seamlessly, I would argue. Seamlessly. This dude, it's not as awful as I'm probably making it out. I think I'm kind of on a bandwagon right now of not liking what this film is versus what it could have been, but I do think you can
Uh,
see the patches is all. It's
sure.
not put together as well.
Mhm.
I also hate that he
And
lives.
I wasn't. Yeah. Well. Yeah.
I have things to talk about with that actually. I want you to finish your point because we need to talk about the ending because the ending
We do. Yeah. And
is
that's kind of where I was going. 'Cause I honestly, I see the patches you're talking about with the governor. I didn't really care because I was paying
probably
more
fair.
attention to McDonald. He like the governor is kind of there for plot purposes, like, and
That's fair.
he
That's
works
fair.
for the allegory. And sure, definitely could have gotten a more dastardly villain out of him, like a more iconic villain. He actually, this is worth noting. He has the potential to be an iconic villain,
Yeah.
and he falls short because
Yes.
of the weaknesses you're
The
talking
true
about.
catalyst of the Planet of the Apes. Not really.
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
I don't think he even compares to Zaius when really you really argue he's not a villain. But he's not even
Yeah.
as good a villain, I don't think, as Dr. Zaius.
He's really just more kind of a part of the setting up until the point where he's having the face-to-face conversation with
Yeah.
Caesar, where
Yeah, exactly.
there's lines that they're trading back and forth. Like the dialogue gets strong at the
Mm-hmm.
end of this film, I think, even though
Yeah.
they drop some cliches.
Well, it gets strong and it gets dubbed, which is really,
Yes, the very end
really.
of it bothered me. I was like, did they
Oh,
change things?
they did. They did. I looked it up because I
Yeah.
needed to know.
Okay.
And I hate it.
Hmm.
It was so weird when I was a kid because it was one of those things where like you start paying attention to movies around that age and I was like, what is this? The tone of voice has changed. We don't see his mouth moving. What is this? So the original ending ends with Caesar's speech the way it was, and then the apes beat that guy to death with their guns, and it
That's
ends.
what I would have expected because
Right,
there's a
'cause
sudden change at the end.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
and the last several films, it's the tone now that you've set up where these films end as dark as they possibly can. The
And
first
it
one
just did it
ended.
for this one? I thought that was weird.
Yes, exactly. This one ends with them being a merciful, empathetic Planet of the Apes. Fuck that, man! Kill that bitch. It doesn't work. It's when you do this in movies where you just spent 20 minutes killing every motherfucker with a pulse, and then
Yeah.
the main bad guy is here. He's like, you know what? No, I'm not gonna
You're
do
the
that.
one that was in charge. You're the one that caused all the problems,
Yeah.
but you're the one we're gonna spare
'Cause-
because morality.
Yeah, fuck Frank the janitor and all the other security guards and pencil pushers that we came across in the last 15 minutes. But the dude behind it all, the head of the snake, nah, he'll be fine. This is going to be an example of our mercy. No,
Mhm.
for whatever reason, and I don't know why. Given how the other three ended, it tested poorly with audiences. So they went back, they added that extra bit of speech, which I find, for one, it's jarring as hell. It
Yeah.
doesn't make a lot of sense narratively. It just doesn't, and I think it takes away from the film. It just does. The idea of Cornelius and Zira's kid turning into like going full Anakin, going Dune, is kind of interesting with the beginning of the Planet of the Apes, and you
Well-
would have sympathized with them.
And it matches up better with both the tone and the message and the history of the other films to have him go a little tyrannical, a little violent. Like, The conversation that he has with McDonald at the end, I think, is really interesting. I mean, the violence prolongs hate, hate prolongs violence. By right, what right are you spilling blood?
Yeah, the
And it's
slave's
like,
right to
the
punish his
slave's right.
persecutors.
Uh-huh. And then they go back and forth, like, don't make it worse. Do you think it could be
Worse than this? Like,
and
I love
the fact
that. It's
they're
great.
on the same stairs that started the whole thing.
It's great.
Yeah.
It really is. Again, I think it's one of those things where, like, third favorite part of the movie is a part they couldn't dedicate themselves to, changed, and tacked on this weird dubbed part. Also, they introduced that Lisa can talk. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? I think we're about done with this one anyway. I mean, I don't really know what else to, like, when we get to Rise of the Planet of the Apes, we will talk about it, I think, a little bit more, because there will be comparisons to be made.
Okay.
But I'm kind of done with it at this point. I mean,
No, I feel like I like this one.
Okay.
But I think it's ambitious, and that's the problem.
That too.
It's trying to be a part of a franchise. It's clearly got something going on about slavery and humanity and everything, and it's got a lot happening, and I think that it doesn't handle it all as well as it probably could.
I think technically it's better than the last one. I think it's better than Escape, but I enjoy Escape more because sometimes it feels like there's very little happening here, despite what they're trying to do.
There's a lot of scenes without dialogue, which I think
and music
can work. But there, and especially like at the end, it's a lot of just like shots of, like, right before the conflict really gets heated. It's just a lot of shots of like apes kind of like running around, and there's no music and there's no dialogue,
exactly.
And it's just like,
and there is technically, it's not their fault. Each one of these movies, despite being the top movie of the week every time one came out, and being very popular, Warner Brothers or Fox, whatever it was, they were like close to bankruptcy because their other films were bombing. So the budget for each Planet of the Apes film got slashed and slashed and slashed. And you can see it kind of because the number of people wearing the good ape makeup diminishes with each movie. There's technically only
noticed
two
there was
in this one. There's 3 in the last one. The rest of them are just really good masks. The masks get better, but the makeup is not the same. It's just Lisa and Caesar.
They apparently, this one was the one with the smallest budget. There was a little trivia thing that popped up on Amazon Prime, and it's like, this is the smallest budget.
They filmed most of it on the campus of like a university in California that had very futuristic architecture, which is why they chose it. And they did like some interesting angles to try to make it look like it's bigger than it was. I kind of enjoy knowing where we are in a space with movies. I never felt like we were in an expansive area with this movie.
No, because they use the same, they use the same square over and over and over.
Like, you're doing good with what you got, man. It's 72, whatever. Like, I feel you. You're doing the best. I did not feel like we covered, like, it's like, they used multiple angles in the same campus to make it feel like it was over the entire scale of a city. It's like, did you, though?
No.
You might have tried, but I didn't feel like that, my guy.
In the city, maybe.
Maybe a big campus. The other part, which is a little spooky, the thing about this movie, the thing that kicks off the Planet of the Apes, technically, is the disease that knocks out all the dogs and cats. This film came out in the early 70s, takes place in 1991. 8 years after the movie came out, there was a pandemic that swept the world that killed thousands of dogs. There was a legitimate dog pandemic that happened, I guess, in the 80s, which is really weird.
The amount of like fear. If you've seen these movies, you're like, dude.
It's like, hey, maybe we should stop making these dystopian apocalyptic movies.
They always seem to come true.
They're always somehow worse but more boring than the movies, though. Like, no aliens, no dinosaurs, no giant lizards, just racists and pandemics. Like, can we get a little variety, please?
No adventure, only pain.
Damn. But that's where we're at, I think, with this one. But the potential was great. 'Tis not a whale. Could have. It's like a whale skeleton. Like, I could see what it could have been.
Yeah, like the pieces are there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whale fetus.
Like, I think on paper, brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Caesar rallying all the apes and using the systems and systematically being smart and teaching everyone what they need to do. So good. But when you only spend a minute and a half of film on it, sir.
Yeah.
Pass.
And I feel like the budget definitely hurt this one too.
It did.
They might have had more time to finish and polish everything and make it a little bit more consistent.
Yeah.
If it were not for that.
Yeah. Otherwise, on to the next. I got one more of the original series, and then we take a brief Burton break.
Is it going to be a break, though, or are we going to be stressed?
It's going to be stress. And then we get into the really good ones. Just one more month, technically, with how these will be released.
Month?
Not for us, but technically, because we have... Okay, well, wait. 1, 2... Okay, 2 weeks. I'm sorry. We have 2 weeks, and then we start the good ones.
Okay.
Got a little ahead of myself. Anyway, that's it. We're done. Ending.
End.
End.
Scene.